Well, welcome to the Better Together podcast. And today we're continuing with our pastor series on resilient ministry. We're going to talk about understanding emotional intelligence with Reverend Terry Pierce at the Connect Church in Tupelo, Mississippi. And so many of you know Terry, you've seen some of his webinars before. He's one of our coaches. And Terry, really everything we're talking about can be found in this book, Resilient Ministry, What Pastors Told Us About Surviving and Thriving by Burns, Chapman, and Guthrie. And it's one of the books that you guys as coaches have been using. It's quite an effective book, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it's, I just cannot continue to recommend it enough to pastors. It's all of the years of practical experience that we have wanted to put down in an articulate, almost even an academic setting, because the writers of this, the four writers are really, they come from an academic background, but they did all of the research with real life pastors on the front lines in the fields. And so it is one of the most brilliant books I've ever read that both challenges me, but then helps me relate and understand. It is so relatability in this book to being able to understand the heart of a pastor, because they're not telling us in theory. They went out and interviewed and researched and did the analysis of the pastors and then drew the conclusions from an academic standpoint. So it's just the best of both worlds.
It is. And so today, if you've not seen the previous sessions, we encourage you to go back and look at those. But today, we're going to talk about emotional intelligence. And this is pretty cool. So they quote one of their pastors who said, "When I was in seminary, I was taught how to preach and how to exegete the scriptures. I wasn't taught how to exegete people. I didn't know that pastoring is dealing with people and their messiness." So this is a big part of it, isn't it, Terry?
Well, every pastor that just listened to that quote that's watching this webinar today just shouted and had a Holy Spirit moment, because we've all, and again, it's not a knock on seminary or Bible college stuff, but it is reality of where we're at. And there's just, in a sense, it's difficult to prepare guys for it. But that's what this book does, guys, is this book helps bridge the gap between, the seminary degrees that we have and, in our training. And we need all that. It's very valuable, but this really, what we're not prepared for is to deal with the messiness of people. And I love that, because it is so true.
It is true. And they do use a lot of work from the research out there on emotional intelligence. Here's one of the books they talk about,
yes,
Shankman and Allen. And I do encourage you to take a look at that. And if you've never studied any on emotional intelligence, probably the core book on that is by Daniel Goleman, Working with Emotional Intelligence. And, in a nutshell, people may say, well, this is psychology and this is not really Christianity. If you think about what Paul said in 1 Corinthians 9, where he talked about really putting himself in the shoes of other people, that's what emotionally intelligent people do. And you could also go and read Goldman's book, Working with Emotional Intelligence. And that's one of the things that he talks about. He doesn't talk about the scripture, but people that are emotionally intelligent really do what Philippians 2 says. They have the attitude of Christ. They're not self-centered, but they are healthy from their self part as well. That's pretty much it in a nutshell, isn't it, Terry?
Yeah, and it's, we're fooling ourselves, Eddie, if we don't realize that God and our Creator designed us. And part of that, awareness is to understand our emotions and our intelligence and how they work together, because we're made in His image. And it's really shortchanging our Creator God if we don't recognize that this emotional intelligence it plays a major role in how you deal with people in your ministry. Pete Scazzaro summarizes, this statement when he makes a blunt statement on page 103 of this book, but he says emotional health, and this is cool, emotional health and spiritual maturity are inseparable. Emotional health and spiritual maturity are inseparable. Whether we like it or not, Eddie, you can be a great exegete of theological passages, but if you're tore up inside because you've got Susie at your church that's just giving you what for over the fact that you changed the color of the padding on the pews, and you can't figure out how to deal with her, and then again, some of the summary statements that the pastors made in their interviews, this is why I love this book. It puts real life quotes quotes in there. One of the pastors said, "I'm trembling inside. I feel that I'm an emotional and spiritual infant leading a large church." And then he goes on to say, "I'm in danger of crashing and losing a lot of things if those things don't change inside of me." I am convinced, Eddie, that so many of our guys can relate to those kind of statements and quotes, that we just feel like we're emotionally drained. And no matter how good the word is, we're not being able to relate that to people because we're frustrated and dealing with difficult people.
That's great. And if we think about it in the Bible, consider Joseph, for example. He's a guy that went through some difficult times, but his emotional intelligence helped him to deal with difficult people, the Pharaohs and so forth. And really, as you think about these principles, and it all really does apply to what we're like and how God has uniquely positioned us. And we really want to concentrate on thinking about emotional intelligence, being emotionally intelligent, and also looking at where other people are, don't we?
Absolutely. And, I've just been reading, our church is doing a Bible reading plan together that we kicked off in June. And so I've been going back through the story of Abraham and, of course, we understand the theology of all that story in the covenant. But one of the things, if we're not careful, that we fail to appreciate is the scriptures show us the good, bad, and the ugly. And Abraham emotionally made some poor choices, because he would just offer his wife to whoever to get out of a situation. And then you look at Rebecca, and Isaac and, Jacob and all of the parental, miscues that they had. And these people were really honestly trying to seek God. I mean, who would compare any of us to Abraham? And yet he made emotionally bad decisions, several times because he just wasn't prepared for the circumstances, and he interjected himself rather than allowing God in it. And we need to understand that, we have bad days as pastors, and we have seasons. And this is an important topic to understand. I remember a pastor telling me years ago, you got to understand, Brother Terry, that the tide comes in and the tide goes out, and there's an emotional response that you cannot change that. Yeah. There are good seasons and there are bad seasons, and it's part of the harvest. It's part of the sowing. It's all biblical, and we're really fooling ourselves if we don't understand the whole sowing and reaping concept, that you can't be reaping all the time, and you've got to get through those seasons where you're doing the sowing and investing and wait on God to do it, because we don't grow plants, we just sow seeds.
There you go. And so it helps to learn about that and to do what we can. One of the books they look at it is to take advantage of who it is that we would say that God has made us to be. I think you referenced Crusoe a minute ago, and
right.
But one of the things they look at with managers is figure out who you are, who it is that we would say that you have been made to be, what God has made you to be. And then when you're better able to understand yourself, you're in a better spot to be able to work with and to be able to help other people.
He's going to talk a little bit. I think you'll probably hit that maybe later in the webinar, but something that I've been reading and really studying a lot, and it's not a definitive word, certainly not Bible, but it is a helpful tool. And this is what you're arguing for, Eddie, with these resources that you're placing right now on the screen is, I've been studying a lot about Enneagram and understanding, he's going to talk about understanding your family history through the Enneagram and how that impacts you. But, we as pastors, we really need to become self-aware. And, even in the revitalization coaching that I'm doing with pastors is, I'm taking them through this book, and it's been unbelievable how the guys are responding to say, man, I've just never really been good at becoming self-aware. I just, try to do the mechanics of pastoring, and you've got to know your rhythms. You got to know, when you're productive, and you need to understand, especially those of us that have staff, we've got to understand, my staff, so I'm challenged, but anyway.
Hopefully they're not listening to this, but then again, they need to listen.
So we love them, but anyway, but in all honesty, that's one of the things over the years is learning how to understand those strengths and weaknesses. And even if your church doesn't have a staff, it is learning to know the rhythms and emotional understanding of your boards, of the
Yeah.
volunteer leaders that you have. You're going to have a lady come resign, that's doing your nursery, that's just fed up with people that won't show up to help out with the nursery ministry. And you've got to know when to just let her vent. Let her calm down, and don't let her resign right away and just come back and say, you know what, we're going to give you more help, but we need you to stay in this. It's how you handle those kinds of
Oh, that's great. And so really, we know Paul talked about in Romans 12, do a sober assessment, when he's talking about spiritual gifts. What you're really saying, Terry, is do an assessment of everything. Think about how you were brought up, think about when you work better, when you're more effective. And then you got into with the nursery worker there, you've got to do a sober assessment of other people as well. And that's what the opening quote was about. He said, you have to exegete the scriptures, you have to exegete other people. And so we all know them. Some of our people quit every third week or whatever. You can almost count on it happening in a certain way, but they don't mean to quit, and they really are kind of counting on us to come back and do what you just said. Hey, take a breath there, giving them a little bit of grace, loving them. And actually, sometimes they also become more self-aware and more capable of having higher emotional intelligence as well. So what you're saying, Terry, this about yourself, but you're also saying if you've got a staff, we all have volunteers, we all have other people in our work, we're looking at where they're at emotionally. And, just like the proverb says, a soft answer turns away wrath. We're looking at a particular situation, figuring out what to do and how to handle those. He also talks about developing EQ, which we'll really get in that in our next webinar, but is something that we always want to constantly be doing, knowing ourselves, knowing others, and helping ourselves become more emotionally intelligent, which looks like what we see happening in the life of Joseph and the life also of Moses and others. But Terry, we have to talk a bit about ministry leadership and the requirements for EQ, don't we?
Yeah, Eddie, if you can put that slide back up, the one before this on the leader's journey. And that book, I would encourage our guys, as leaders and pastors, there is so many good resources out there. And this is another one. We have got to stay reading and encouraging ourselves about leadership. That's the area that our seminaries and colleges struggle to teach us, is about leadership and identify, and then back to your chart about the ministry leadership requirements. The problem of people pleasing, what a challenge that is. And and here's a great statement in our text on page 107 for those that are following along with us. It says, you have to know who you are and how others are different. And that is such a significant statement. You have to know who you are. You're not going to make everybody happy. Everybody is created different. That's why I've been studying the Enneagram. How can you manage yourself or work with other people if you don't know how everyone is unique? And we just got to identify, you and I were in college together, but, Dr. Pinson, but, you could put me, Dr. Moody, and Dr. Pinson together, and you're going to look at three different dudes. There's just three different gifts. We have three different total personalities, and yet God uses us. So there's not we think of hierarchical or what's more important. No, God created us and gifted us. And the key to us being used by God is for us to be thankful for who he made us to be. I have no desire to be president of Welch College. I have no desire to be president of this denomination, but I shouldn't be. This is what God created me to be, as pastor at Tupelo. And if you guys will learn to be thankful for where God's put you at, I don't want to be a Moody or Pinson. I need to be Terry Pierce, because I'm never going to be them. And know what? They're not going to be me. And I'm not sure they're knocking on the door to do that, but understanding that, the ministry requirements, that, the challenges of listening and expressing empathy. One of the things that God is doing in my life, you've been praying for me, Eddie, and I appreciate it. I've had this herniated disc now for 8 weeks and not going to be doing the surgery, until August. And one of the things that I shared with my congregation, and I hope the pastors are listening, this is becoming emotionally intelligent and aware of how God can use this. And I just have spent so many weeks now in pain and not being able to do the things that I physically, my exercise programs, my yard, all of the stuff that I would have been doing. And so I've been listening to God in this process and becoming more self-aware. And the overwhelming thing, and there's a number of things that God has taught me, but first on that list is God has been teaching me how to have more empathy. And I'm a pastor at 56 years of age, but I've always been healthy, and I'm just like, we got to suck this up, buttercup, and do it or whatever, because that's how I live my life. But what God has taught me is how to feel and understand the pain of my people better, and it's changing my prayer life. This is a real life example of becoming self-aware and understanding how to adjust. And God is saying, I need you to do a better job of having empathy for your congregation.
That's good. And sometimes we avoid conflict. We sweep things under the rugs. There's sometimes where we have to be part of being emotionally intelligent is how we do handle conflict.
Yes.
But we don't want to be a Hezekiah to leave it for the next guy either, and as long as things are okay on my watch. So he talks about, that's one of the things we have to watch. We have to work with people gently, talking to them, approaching them when they're off track. You alluded this earlier, having times where we stop and reflect, and we can be so busy in the ministry.
It's such a key.
Yes. Process. And I know you and your staff probably do this after every service, probably on Monday morning. That's usually the way we would do it. What went well, what didn't go well.
Right.
And if you don't have a staff, you want to stop and you want to think that through, process that, helps us get better. Absolutely. And you want to talk a bit about the problem of emotion faking?
Yeah, I think that I was talking to a church in the revitalization process last night, and Eddie, they've had some very historic pastors at this particular congregation over the years, and all of them would eventually struggle in some area of their life, to some part of it. And the congregation overwhelmingly, and I'm talking about folks that have been there at that church for years and decades, to even people that had gotten saved there. And one of the guys' testimony was, he said, I was on fire for the Lord, but he said, after a while, nobody discipled me. He said, I was excited, but the rest of the church wasn't excited. And this guy got saved and never been to church, and he got saved in his early 20s. And he said, I assumed everybody was pumped and as excited about this as I am. But then he said, what I realized is that, what is happening in my life is that I realized that I just saw a lot of fake things. I saw a lot of things that were not real. And he said, I just got discouraged and left there with everybody else. And so one of the things that we've got to be, guys, is we've got to be, to that place where we are realizing that we are emotionally genuine to our people, and they've got to be authentic. And if I have time to just give a real quick story to that analysis, I have a deacon and a chairman of our deacon board, and he's just been diagnosed with brain tumor, and really, it doesn't look very good, the prognosis of it. But this guy grew up as a Free Will Baptist pastor's son, so he knows Free Will Baptist. He's understood us. He's understood what that dilemma is like, and he was the guy that, as a deacon, as a chairman of our board, that he would come inside and he would be the guy that he would just coach me, and he would say to me, Terry, here's where you need to back up. Here's where you need to push forward. And he was the guy that allowed me to have those emotions, but in those times of reflection. So even when you don't have a staff, guys, allow people in your church to come alongside of you and say, Pastor Terry, you need to tone it down a little bit. The majority of the church is with you. Don't get discouraged and try to hang on to the negative people. I was emotionally thinking I could convince all of these people the direction we needed to do. And what this deacon did is he would also then say, Terry, go get them. and he was my encourager at the right time. And so allow God to send people that emotionally help you connect and be on track with that.
That's good. That's good. So we work on our own emotional intelligence, thinking about our own background, how God's made us, using that to God's glory. We're studying other people's, and then we're also letting other people in our lives that are going to help us, like this deacon, to help us with some of these issues and strengthen us along.
Absolutely.
Hey, thank you for sharing today, Terry, and all of you who are listening. We thank you for stopping in and listening today. And we encourage you to go to the Better Together podcast site. If you would like that, share that when you can. We also encourage you to go to our YouTube site, subscribe, and you're going to find more videos like this that will be helpful to you. And we encourage you to come back and join us for our next segment. So in the next segment, we're going to talk about what we can do individually to concentrate on actually developing better emotional intelligence. So thank you for joining us today.